Now, why you're all here today. I am thrilled to introduce my friend and community thought leader, my friend Alex, who's going to talk to us all about digital customer success. So Alex, welcome to the Client Success webinar series.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So nice to be here and appreciate you having me.
We are so thrilled. I mean, this is your jam. So I'm so excited to hear everything you're going to share with us today. Here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to give you a second. You can pull up your slides, do your intro, get us started. I am going to go off camera. I will be here taking notes. I'll be in the chat. So for those of you who want to participate in the conversation there, I'll see you there. And Alex, you just let me know when you're all wrapped up and we'll get to some great Q&A at the end.
Sounds like a plan.
All
Thanks
right. I'll see you in a bit.
Nice to be here. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'm Alex Turkovic. I lead the digital customer success function at Snow Software currently. Also host the Digital Customer Success podcast, which has been out for a few months now. I think we're on episode 20-ish, something like that. Christy was on last week, so thanks, Christy, again for being on. But yeah, it's my little home in the universe of CS for all things digital, which is one of my favorite topics, obviously. My background is largely in, I started kind of in the music industry. So if there's any musicians out there, shout out, welcome. Nice to be among you. But I started in kind of L&D in corporate, that morphed into customer education, that morphed into professional services, that morphed into, customer success. And digital for me is a sweet spot between being able to enable a whole broad set of customers while doing so with fun technology and innovation, I suppose. But you're not here to hear about my background, here to hear about the symbiosis of the machine and the human, which is super fun because a lot of people think that digital customer success motion is strictly digital, when in reality it should bolster your humans, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So for today, I put together a quick agenda for us to go through where I'm going to spend a little bit of time setting a baseline. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital CS definition. I'm going to give you a sneak peek into something that I'm working on with regards to a digital CS maturity model. Then we're going to get into some practical examples of, how humans and digital motions play nice with each other. But the agenda doesn't stop there because, really your questions are a big part of what I look forward to here. I see Sam started in music too. That's awesome. So yeah, Sam, what'd you play? Put it in the chat. So without further ado, let's proceed, shall we? I do want to start by dispelling kind of a common myth. Now, this is a myth that is more so on the, I would say on the CSM individual contributor level versus the leadership level, but it's a myth nonetheless. And that is that digital CS and things like Gen AI are here to replace your job. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And in fact, the way I like to look at it is these things aren't here to replace the CSMs. They're here to bolster our CSMs. In fact, I like to say that they're here to make you look good. And so, these motions that we put in place aren't just customer facing. A lot of the digital motions that we want to put in place are actually internal facing and help digital CSM or CSMs to perform better. And there's any number of ways you can go about this, but in general, I like to think of it in terms of automating some of the insights that your team needs to perform and keep your customers informed, reducing time spent on those tasks that are just daily tasks that don't necessarily need a human involved, so that your customer success managers can focus on those high value activities that are then backed by digital motions. Now, in terms of digital customer success itself, one of the things that I've been doing on a weekly basis on the podcast is I ask all of my guests what their kind of elevator pitch or definition of digital customer success is. And probably it comes surprised that everybody's definition is a little bit different. There's nuances to every definition because people come from different backgrounds. They're in different situations in their work life. They have different tool sets around them, different data sets. Their customers are all different. And so I like to, Christy's favorite term with regards to this kind of stuff is it depends, right? And in a large part, the definition of digital customer success depends on your environment. However, as I've gone through and asked this question, I've compiled the answers on the website. There's a word map that you can go check out where everybody's answers are nicely packaged into one place. And again, you'll see some pretty big differences, but then you start to tease out some of the commonalities between those answers. And using those commonalities and my own experience, I've put together basically my own version of the elevator pitch. If I had to describe what digital CS is to somebody in a couple of seconds, it's about getting the right message to the right contact at the right time via the right channel, lots of rights, both internally and externally, an important factor here. And ultimately, you're trying to really just drive valuable outcomes, right? So I'm curious if anyone has any additions to that in the chat. I see a lively chat, which is cool. Anyway, put your own definitions in the chat. I want to read those later. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully that sets the baseline a little bit. Now, another thing that I've been working through is trying to establish a digital CS maturity model with the goal of, again, not necessarily defining what a perfect program looks like, because a perfect program is one that fits into your business and how you operate and what resources you have available to you. So there's lots of factors, lots of contributing factors into what your own program will look like. But I think there's some general trends, again, to indicate where you are on the maturity curve of a digital program. And I've basically distilled it into these 4 stages, starting with foundational engagement, omni-channel growth, persona optimization, not a misspelling, it is persona, not personal, onto strategic excellence. And to give you a sense for what I mean behind all of these, I promise I'm not going to read PowerPoint to you today. But I do want to focus a little bit on the goal of each stage that I've laid out for you versus the example, because the example, again, is situational depending on your environment. But in that first stage, foundational engagement, you're starting with what you have. You're building upon that, whether it's a little bit of data and an email campaign or something like that. You're starting small with what you have, and you're slowly building up upon that. Omnichannel, you're starting to get into different ways of engaging with your customers as well as your CSMs, whether that be in product or even SMS. I've seen a couple people use SMS effectively, which is pretty cool. You're starting to get into really identifying who those different personas are among your customer base, and really strategically thinking about how you want to engage those specific people. And then finally, strategic excellence. You want to be the point of valuable valuable insights to the rest of the business as to the health of your customers, how your customers are doing, so that you can drive those strategic decisions going forward. So I hope that was helpful. Figured we'd set a little bit of a baseline here. Would love your feedback at some point on this as well, because, working on a little extra something here for you. Now, onto the topic for today, which is really, why do we combine digital motions and humans, and where should you really start around that? Because probably my number one question that I get is, hey, where do I start with this whole digital thing? So a random, maybe not so random analogy, digital CS is like an exoskeleton for your team. So we're going to take a quick second here, and I want you to answer in the chat what you think of when you think of an exoskeleton? What mental images conjure for you? Insects. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay. The Terminator. Couple more. Iron Man. Ooh, I like that. I should have used Iron Man in this presentation. Lobster. Yeah, very cool. Thanks for those of you who answered. To me, one of the things you might be thinking of, mechanical body armor, support, empty building. Interesting. One of the things you might be thinking about is something along these lines. For you Lego fans out there, you're welcome. But a lot of times we think of these science fiction kind of exoskeletons of things and machines that give us superhuman powers, to do things that normal humans might not be able to do. And I do think that paints a really great picture, but I don't quite think it's super. It might not be quite the right analogy here. So I'd like to actually think about something maybe more like this, where it falls into the line of performance support. We're not trying to like build this massive behemoth of a program. We're not trying to be Clippy, for those of you who lived several decades ago in Microsoft land. But what we're really striving to do is to assist the CSM and to be a helping hand for our customer in ways that might be a little bit subtle. One of the things that I like to say is as a digital CS leader, I'm perfectly happy for CSMs on the team to take all the credit for everything that I do, whether it be email or in-app engagement or whatever. If it's valuable to the customer and the CSM can benefit from that, I think that is, definitely a win. And another way I like to say this is, digital motions should be more felt than seen, right? They should be present. They should help your teams and your customers perform, but they don't need to be in the spotlight, so to speak. So, what does that, really, when you think about it, the only limiting factor here is a little bit of your creativity and what systems you have around you. And so I do want to provide you with, perhaps a couple of practical examples for, how you might think about integrating your humans and your digital motions. First and foremost, something that probably most of us do is your welcome email and offering a link to book a call to your scale team, for instance. A lot of times those welcome emails, and I might go off on this for a second here. A lot of times our welcome emails are maybe like a checkbox type activity where you send off a welcome email and, a lot of those motions just kind of live in their own little world, in their own little bubble, and just kind of operate without any real tangible kind of interaction on the back end of that. So, not only do I like to really look at the engagement rates on those welcome emails and who's engaging, who's not engaging, and then following up with those that aren't engaging. Another thing that I see in a lot of these welcome emails is just stuffing them full of information. And that isn't necessarily too effective either, right? If you can link out to one resource that has all the information, or you do a drip feed campaign with information every other week or every week or something like that, those tend to be a little bit more effective. That said, what I do like to incorporate into all of these is the ability to book a call with someone on the team. You might have a pooled team. That would be an excellent use of, pooled team or a scaled CS team. I've seen some folks use their, their one-to-one CSMs or their enterprise CSMs for this type of function as well in a round robin kind of way. Or just get creative with the resources that you have, right? Not everybody has dedicated teams to this kind of thing. But I think the intent behind this is you're always there. You're always there for the customer and always willing to kind of jump on the phone if anything comes up. And a lot of folks are afraid to do these kinds of things because it means, you know, they think that the team's going to get flooded with calls and things like that. But 9 times out of 10, I haven't seen that kind of play out that way. Another good example is surveys. We love sending surveys. Marketing loves sending surveys. Product loves sending surveys. You know, and in a survey-rich environment, not only can you, you know, really wear out your customer base, as we all know, but it also a lot of times feels like your customers might be responding to a survey into some sort of vacuum. And the best practice here, at least for me, is I want to make sure that our customers feel heard in some form or fashion, which means responding to those bits of feedback that you get. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't, and I think this is where the digital human element comes into play. I don't necessarily think that, you know, you need to physically respond to every response that comes in unless that's what you want to do. But you can, again, use those automated responses, you know, and either offer a call or make it from the CSM so that the customers can respond very easily. If they're detractors, you might have a completely different, you know, in the case of NPS anyway, if they're detractors, you might have a completely different strategy to if they were promoters. Promoters, you might want to invite them into your advocacy program. Your detractors, you might want to actually just pick up the phone and call. Yes, we still like to pick up the phone once in a while. But again, it's that it's using your creativity combined with the tools and the resources that you have to really figure out where that best marriage is between your digital motion and the human follow-up or the human engagement that's appropriate. Another you know, kind of practical example is around release notes. This is you know, something that happens regularly in SaaS, and you know, some are really great at communicating release notes. Others are not so great at communicating release notes. And you know, by and large, these are things that, you know, can be automated, whether it's via email or in-app. But again, this is a good example of where you might use the from email address as a point of response. The other thing that I do like to do is if we automate an email, especially around release notes, we might give for a digital account or a non-CSM owned account, we might just send the email, send it off, general you know, email inbox coming back to us. But if it is a CSM owned account, we'll put the template in the system. We'll let the CSM send it with their own context added into the email. It adds a little bit of personal touch, and it also makes that email more relevant to the account, especially if there are releases that are specifically geared towards or would specifically help a customer drive towards an outcome. The last example that I'll give you is really around the internal handoff, our beloved internal handoff. The one that comes to mind is obviously your sales to post-sales handoff. That's the one that's usually quite top of mind, but may not be the only handoff. You know, you may have handoffs between different teams into professional services or whatnot. But I think the automation that goes behind those internal handoffs can help alleviate some of the things that we encounter on a regular basis that are sticking points. You know, just putting a couple of scenarios out there. Sometimes when you're in a fast-paced, high-pressure environment, a seller might close a deal, they're on to the next deal. They're not necessarily paying attention to all of the minute details that need to get handed off. Those are things that you can capture pre-sale and automate in a flow post-sale. And then, you know, things like having notifications for scheduling handoff calls and things like that are all things that you can automate to assist the human to do the gig. Obviously, I think incentive structure goes into that, but we're not here to talk about, who's incentivized to do what. I know the sales to CS handoff can be a contentious topic for sure. But I think this is where we as digital CS practitioners can help be part of that solution and help alleviate some of the pain points that we typically encounter in terms of handing off outcomes, handing off pertinent information, handing off contact information in a relevant and unobtrusive way. Interesting comment, Jan. Hi, Jan. How are you? Jan posted she doesn't like sending release notes. They aren't customer centric. They are company centric. I would agree with you there. I think it's a bit of a catch-22 sometimes because you've got information that you would want to get out to the customer, or that sometimes customers demand, but to your point, they're not very personal, which is again why I think having a CSM in the middle there is quite cool. One thing I wanted to highlight here, this is actually, I had planned to post just the previous image, but then Christy, you posted yesterday as well. One of the things that I like to do for guests that attend the podcast is send a thank you note, like a handwritten thank you note. No, I'm not using a third-party service to handwrite my notes. I like to send handwritten notes. It's something that my parents instilled in me. I don't know. I'm a sucker for being old-fashioned, but I find that these things have a big impact sometimes. And this is an example of what I do with my own podcast, but I think this is an excellent thing to do from a customer perspective. Sending somebody a congratulatory note that they've accomplished something, or they've achieved a goal, or they've uploaded X number of widgets into the tool, or they've really shown engagement with the tool. I think celebrating those wins is fantastic. And a lot of times we don't even know that happens. And so that's, again, where the intersection of automation and the human come into play, where you should have, the telemetry triggers set up to kind of alert you if XYZ happens. And then on the back end, define what you want to do out of that. Get everybody a book of stamps and some cards, and, take a little bit of extra time once a week to send a couple of cards. You'll find it does make a big difference in the long run. You're not going to get a response from everybody. Heck, you may not have everybody's address, but it helps to build kind of that personal relationship a little bit. And so I figured I'd throw that in as an example of what to do. One thing that I do like to highlight quite a bit is the fact that it's not just on you as the digital program, or you as the learning team, or the knowledge base team, or whatever it is, to come up with the content to push out. I think that a lot of times this requires listening to your customers, right? And it kind of forces you to listen to your customers. But a lot of times that user generated or that CSM generated content can be some of the most effective things that you will put out. I've had a lot of CSMs say, hey, I just sent this email to some of my customers, thought it might be useful. I was like, yes, let's go. Let's automate this stuff. And so I think, if you're operating a digital motion, or you're starting up a digital motion, a best practice is meet with everybody, ask, what are you sending on a regular basis? What are the things that you found particularly valuable for your customers? And then pay some attention in the community. Are there things being posted where there's a one pager that exists that people might not know about, that you might want to distribute on a regular basis to new customers, for instance? And so I think, I don't know if the excuse of I don't know what to send is very valid, because if you look around and unearth some things under rocks or whatever, you'll find some things that provide massive value that already exist in the company, that are very light in terms of effort, that you can help to drive massive value. This is one of those places that I like to point people to when they ask, where do I start in digital? Start with what your CSMs are sending on a regular basis. Start with what support is sending out on a regular basis. What are the most distributed articles, for instance? from your support team. That can be a massive place to start, because guess what? Your customers are asking about it. So as we kind of round things down a little bit, I want to kind of build upon this notion of the fact that your digital motions should give your customers a sense that you really have their best interests in heart, and that they're all part of this journey with you, right? And there can be some kind of branding and identity that you can build around your digital program. But one of the things that I want to highlight is actually something that a previous guest on the podcast has said. Her name is Kaylee Killeran. She's at Lupio. She leads their digital motions. And I feel like she perfectly encapsulated my feelings around digital CS when she said, you're building out an ideal digital customer journey. Why not design it to where at all stages of those engagements, your customers are given the opportunity to engage with a human? And also something that Christy has talked about in her episode and elsewhere as well, is that what you really want to strive towards is building an additive program versus a subtractive program. We all have encountered these scenarios where a customer may be used to having a one-to-one relationship with a CSM, and for whatever reason, we're having to move the customer into some kind of scaled motion, some kind of motion where you're having to serve the customer in a slightly different way, maybe with a pooled team, maybe with a purely digital motion. And that transition can be quite tricky. But again, the way that I like to phrase those things is that you are changing the way that you operate in order to provide additional and massive value to the customer, based on where they are in their journey. And no matter what, behind those digital motions, having a human available and even giving the customer the feeling that they can always reach out to a human if they're encountering certain things, makes, I think, all the difference in those digital motions. And so wherever possible, I try to operate in this way, that we are always providing that human connection as part of our digital motions. So that's the content I had for you today. I really hope that it has resonated in some form or fashion. And I look forward to kind of hearing from you, hearing your feedback, and hearing your questions about this stuff.
Awesome, Alex. Well, thank you so much for that. I was sitting here taking notes. So we're in the process of enhancing some of what we're doing here at ClientSuccess, making a lot of changes. So I'm very excited to incorporate some of your best practices and your recommendations, and making sure that I'm accounting for all of this. So let's do this. You can stop sharing your screen. That way everyone can see all of us in big full screen. I'm going to hop over to the Q&A. So anybody who's in the chat, if you've asked a question in the chat, I'll do my best to get over there and get those questions. But if you have it, the best way to put it is to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll start there. Oh, hi, Carla. So Alex, Carla asked, I like your digital maturity model framework. How are you pulling customer marketing or other parts of the business into your model? That's a great question.
What a good question. One of my recent posts on LinkedIn talked about the fact that this may sound maybe somewhat selfish or whatever, but I truly believe that digital CS is one of those areas or functions within a business that has probably the most variables, because you've got data from all over the place, you've got systems all over the place, your customers are all over the place, your products may be all over the place. And guess what? Digital CS isn't a new thing, right? It's like we're doing things that some other functions have already done in the past. And so to your example, marketing, for instance, email marketing is not a new thing. And so I think, but I think the key distinction is that with a digital CS program, what we're doing is we're aligning these things around the customer journey. And I think that's really the key when you think about that, because a well-defined customer journey, even if it's aspirational, means that you can have a point at which a customer is among the life cycle, where you can make decisions strategically, cross-functionally, as to how are we going to best serve this customer. And so I take issue with the word ownership a little bit, because my point of view is, if we can do something in the digital CS realm, in what we have, the tool sets that we have, and it aligns with what everybody else is doing, great. Do I care if marketing is doing those kinds of things? No, not really. It's whatever's best for the customer at that specific time in their customer journey. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my thoughts.
All right, very good. We got another question here in the chat, so I'm going to bring it over here. What are your thoughts, Alex, in video mail services like Hippo or AirDeck or Loom?
I think they're underutilized and kind of not well. I think they're underutilized. That said, not everybody is comfortable being on camera. So I think where you run into trouble with that is if you try to mandate something across a team, and some will take to it, like they'll use it like crazy. Others won't, because, hey, they don't want to be on camera. They don't want to send XYZ. Now, if you can solve for those kinds of things by having, maybe a set of videos, predefined videos that you can send out at a moment's notice, I think they're awesome in terms of the value add. Because again, today, I mean, we've got TikTok, we've got Reels, we've got whatever it is, and we're very video driven. And so if you can connect with your customers that way, I think it's a win, as long as your team is kind of bought into it. But the other thing I'll say too is, I don't know that it doesn't fit every scenario. Your customers may not kind of go with that. If there's any Germans in the thing, I apologize if the client slightly offends you. I'm Austrian by birth. I have my Austrian passport, so I think I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. But we at Snow Software, we serve a huge customer base in EMEA, a lot of German customers. I can guarantee you that a lot of those customers don't want video. They don't want a personal kind of touch. They want straight to the point facts and whatnot. Now, that may change with different generations and whatnot, but kind of traditionally, it's a little bit more cut and dry. So I think when you go implement those kinds of things, make sure it's appropriate for your customer, and make sure your customers resonate with that.
That's such a good point, Alex. I've managed global teams in my previous roles, and the one thing we've had to do is, regardless of model, right, is really customize our approach to different regions around the world, because culturally things are done different, right? Like how we had to do things in Japan looked very different than how we did things here in the States and other locations as well. So I think that's a big consideration that folks will have to take too. All right, let's look for more questions here. I'm just scrolling through to see. If anyone has
Did we
any more
get some
questions,
additional
drop them
definitions for digital CS?
Maura provided one.
Oh yeah.
So hers was digitize the customer journey by leveraging technology, data-driven automation, and digital resources to optimize the customer experience.
Cool. Yes.
I tried to have the world's shortest definition for that.
You did. Yeah.
All right, let's see if there's any more questions. Okay. Yes. All right. So Bill, thank you so much. So how do you go about handling client objections with moving from a dedicated CSM to a pooled model in digital CS?
Yeah, it relates a little bit to, I kind of skirted around the topic a little bit earlier. But we've been part of those initiatives where we've, where we've kind of pulled customers from one scenario to another scenario. And I think the way to handle it, first off, I would hope that if you're doing those kinds of things, that you've kind of put some thought into what that program looks like, because ideally you wouldn't be dropping your customer off of a cliff, right? There should be some kind of touch points and things like that along the way. And so I think the way to handle those objections really is to be as transparent and honest about what it is you're doing, and then also how your customers will benefit from those kinds of things. Because, you know, what may be a benefit to some, maybe not a benefit to others, but I think having open and honest conversations with customers about that transition is really one of the ways to find that out. And I think you'll find that especially a lot of customers who don't engage with a CSM or a CSM team frequently might be, better suited to, like, going to a purely digital program. They might actually like that kind of thing. And so I think a little bit is looking at the customer's historical trends with engagement with your teams and even the support teams as well, to see, are there some customers that are more appropriate to do this for than others?
So I'm going to add on to that, Alex. I think you're spot on. So one of the
Yeah.
things that we're doing here at ClientSuccess is I'm going through this like evolution of redesigning our entire post initial sales team. So it's every single person in my org and all the teams and how we function to support all of our customers. It's going to look very different than it does today. So that said, we're moving from what has historically been a high engagement model, really focused on like one-to-one human interaction, right? Every customer has a designated CSM that they go to who managed everything from new to renew, right? If you had a CSM, they managed from onboarding through renewal and the entire life cycle. So we're breaking that all apart. But one of the things that you hit on that I think is important is I'm in the process of conducting customer interviews. And so I've got 40 interviews on the calendar. I've already got a bunch completed where I'm asking our customers very specific questions about the value that they're getting from our current engagement model. And then I'm also introducing what the future design could look like. And I'm getting their feedback. And honestly, what my customers are saying, regardless of how this change might impact them, is one, they appreciate being part of this change. They love that I'm collaborating with them to hear what they need instead of making assumptions. So going back to that transparency and really managing the communication about this, that is one win. So if you have the ability to bring customers into your redesign process, I'd highly recommend it. And the other thing is to your point, is making sure that whatever you move to is additive, right? Just because you're removing humans doesn't mean that you're removing value. So I've been very specific in actually having designed a slide that says, yes, you're losing this, but look at all of what you're getting as a result of it. And you can't debate that, right? And I'm like, because we can make this change, I can give you all of these things that you didn't have before. And this is how it's going to transform your business and the value you as a person are getting. And everyone's like, okay, duh. Feels like a no-brainer. So I think that if you can articulate that as well, is just making sure that your customers are understanding what the give and get is, and that hopefully what they're getting outweighs what they're losing. I think that you're gonna be fine.
Did they actually say okay, duh?
I've had one person say okay, duh.
Cool.
I mean, I've captured all the responses, Alex. We can review it in a later date and time. I know it's actually been really cool. Like the survey we're going through is a really fun exercise. Okay, we got more questions. All right. So another question. There are a lot of onboarding and adoption programs out there. Any examples of programs and playbooks for expansion and renewals?
What a
I got
cool
some ideas,
topic.
but let's say you go first.
Your ideas are probably better than mine.
No, they're not. You go.
So one of the things that I think is, now speaking specifically to digital and automation and things like that, one of the areas where I think automation can really help with this sort of thing is the kind of programmatic systematization. What is the word? Systemization. Sure.
We'll say, yeah,
Of
fine.
different stages along that customer journey leading up to the renewal. And ideally the expansion, right? But being very programmatic about who should engage the customer at what point, depending on the customer life cycle stage and depending on the status of the customer. So your playbook for a customer who's, maybe has a few support tickets here and there, but is generally pretty engaged and generally pretty happy, is going to be much different than a customer whose, health score is burning red and you're, having to put out fires. Obviously, those playbooks are going to look very differently. But what I like to do is build playbooks that incorporate cross-functionally. So, it should incorporate not just the CSM, but the AE at certain times should get a regular digest of how that customer is doing in this certain stage. If you have a renewals team, pulling them in. If you have a solutions consulting or like a sales engineering team, they should get pulled in at certain times, and just being very prescriptive about what should happen when, and being as automated as possible with the insights needed to drive those internal and external conversations.
So I think you said it. So I mean, the only thing that I would add, which is going to be very little value on top of what you've already contributed, but just to speak more specifically to it, like we also have points in time using the renewal or any upsell or growth opportunities, using that data to initiate automation and communication around it while simultaneously it's pulling humans in. So for example, we've got our renewal playbook. We start our renewal process 120 days out, which is 4 months, right? Prior to that, we've got a survey that goes out to customers that asks them, is it your intention to renew or not? Right. With a yes or no. If it's not a yes, anything else is a no. If they don't respond, it's a no. We treat it that way. So we use that just to start to give us some inkling of like, okay, how do we want to manage this? Right. And we can decide, okay, if it's a yes, we can continue down a path of automation where it might say, wonderful, great, your CSM will be reaching out in blah days. But if you get a no, you're going to have human interaction, right? An intervention at that point that's going to start to triage and be like, hey, I'm sorry to hear that that's how you're feeling about the partnership. Like, let's have a conversation and kind of intervene that way. So I think that there's ways that you can leverage automation and human engagement very thoughtfully, but don't feel like when it comes to commercial activities that you can't rely on automation. I think it's something a lot of companies start to feel like they can't do because there's so many things that go into it. I would say yes and no. It depends on what your contract looks like. How easy is your product to buy? Is it simple? Is it priced pretty straightforward? So take those things into consideration. But I would say if you can automate any parts of those processes, I would. Even for growth, if you're on a consumption model and you're tracking consumption, which you probably are if you're on a consumption model, flag your customers in advance and say, hey, you're actually nearing 95% of what you purchased, right? Let's get on a call and talk about this, right? So we can manage this so you don't, and there's no overage or you don't run out or whatever the case may be. If it's a license model and your customers are using all of their licenses they've purchased, great. Let's check in to make sure how's everyone doing? Do they need more, right? If they're not using it, let's have conversations there because that could be risk of downsell. So there's a lot of indicators that could have commercial impact that might not be tied to the commercial motion itself. So you want to figure out ways that you can use data and insights and maybe automate some of that.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I'll add to that, which is something I kind of touched on earlier too, is like the automation of those insights alone is really powerful because, how much time is your team prepping for these conversations? Like how much time are they prepping for internal conversations, executive conversations, customer conversations? If you can just like automate some of the distribution of that data that feeds those conversations, that's huge. That saves a lot of time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're doing a lot of internal and external.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. We got some more questions. Streamlining the handoff from sales to CS is a big topic. Can you go into more detail about this process at Snow?
I can. I mean, we were talking about truth and transparency. It's not great. It's not perfect. Like, it happens, but it is a huge source of attention at the moment because, data is getting collected in different systems. And ideally we all want to kind of march along the same path. And so what we're actually engaged in right now is this little project where, our pre-sales, we call them solution consultants, but it's essentially sales engineering team. They're capturing some of these things up front, and we're working on ways to digitize that and have those things flow over to us in post-sale. So that when we jump into an account, we have all of the source details right there. We can hop on a call with a customer and go, hey, look, I see that you want to solve XYZ challenges. I see you've tried this before and that before, so that we jump into that conversation. It's all done very manually today, and it's done differently from rep to rep, which is exactly why, we're focused on trying to solve that problem. So how do you like that for a non-answer?
I'll tell you, I haven't seen it done really well. Like I haven't had
No.
anybody be like,
Yeah.
oh, nailed it.
Well, and
What
the
I
other
will
thing is,
say, yeah,
like Update AI, Josh and Mickey just did a bunch of workshops on this very topic, and they did DC and they did Austin, which I was a part of, and it was specifically focused on this problem because it is a problem like everywhere.
yeah. I think the closest we've gotten to streamlining this is requiring certain fields in the CRM and having that data being passed through into our CSP, which is Client Success, our customer success platform, to initially start to share that information to facilitate a more streamlined discussion, right? So there's, the team still has to review it. There still needs to be a conversation. The sales team still has to capture information. It needs to not be garbage. So there's a lot of things that obviously there's still a lot of things that could go wrong or not as well, but at least having that information flow from one system to another has been really helpful because historically it's been complete this form, right? And salespeople don't want to do any extra work, right? So,
Yeah.
which we don't either, right? Which is why we're having this conversation. So,
Right.
if anyone does hear of anybody who nails it, let me know. I'd love to have them on a webinar.
Well, I mean, as a seller, like putting myself in the seller's shoes, how many fields am I required to fill out before I have to close a deal? If you're anything like us, it's a boatload, and sure, you can get ahead of things like that. But also if we can streamline things, it just makes everybody else's day happier. I'm just repeating points now, so we can go on to a different topic. How about that?
All right, we got another question.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
Does anyone, and we're going to say that you're anyone in this case, Alex, does anyone have best practices on creating personas for different recipient profiles for digital outreach?
Yeah. uh, I think the way I like to think about it is literally what are the roles at your customer, but let's put a pin in like the internal personas, because your digital programs should take into account internal personas as well. But on the customer element, I mean, yeah, you're going to have, your executive, you're going to have a technical contact, maybe admin type persona. You're going to have somebody, who's probably a more decision maker type persona. But then you have all your functional user based personas. And I think, the best thing there is just to know how your software works and know how your customers are using the software, so that you can then start to kind of tease out if it's one user persona, great, or if it's multiple user personas, you might start to tease those out a little bit, just depending on what they're doing in the tool. That's my general approach. Internally, it's like, you've kind of got your executive level persona. You can have different flows and different information flowing to those folks than your CSMs or your sales folks. So that's my 2 cents anyway.
All right, we got another question here. Not sure if this is a problem anyone faces, but with CSMs, CSCs, scale CSMs, I can appreciate it can be difficult to understand the rules of engagement for each customer success team. How can we nurture our internal stakeholders and create alignment?
Um, Okay, this is my cheesy answer, and my repeated answer is like, hey, look at your customer journey and look at those personas that feed into that customer journey and where it makes sense for whom to engage. And I think part of this just falls up to leadership forcing the cross-functional conversation, and just to say, like, drawing the line in the sand, so that we're not making our team members guess necessarily as to, do I get this one or you get this one? I think it goes into, like, can we clearly segment these customers? Can we clearly identify ideal customer journeys towards those, clearly identify some of the risk profiles against those customers, and then put in place the parameters and the guidance for our teams to follow through with that?
Very good. All right, I'm looking to see if there's any additional questions. If anyone has any additional questions, we could probably take one, maybe two more, probably one.
Jan is dropping the
We could
heat in the
drop them.
chat.
This is what Jan does. She
She
comes to our webinars
does.
and she schools everyone in the chat. I'm scrolling just to make sure I didn't miss anything else here. We talked about that. All right, Alex, then I'm going to ask you a question. No, Jan, you're very helpful. I meant that
You're
in a
very
positive
helpful.
way.
Yeah, yeah. You're part of the team.
No, I meant that in a very like you're so collaborative in the chats always. Um, okay. What is the biggest like if you're getting ready to start this journey, you have nothing built out yet. What is your number one piece of advice? Avoid this at all costs. Do not do this.
Don't buy a CSP before you're ready for it. I know that's unpopular, but like, like do stuff with what you have. Break stuff before you get into like heavy technology or a CSP to like drive your stuff forward. Like just start with what you have. Don't go spending a bunch of money.
I love that. And I can actually support that. Even working at a
Right.
CSP, I want everyone to come in with a strategy behind what they
Yeah.
intend to do with the solution, right? Because that's how we're
Mhm.
going to get value from it. So I actually will support that decision. I would say, yeah, don't over purchase on tech before you've actually tested a few things to see what works. And I think I'm going to say that that applies to almost any customer success strategy, whether you're working on digital or you've got a high engagement model, it does not matter. Try something first, do the things, use Excel, use Google Sheets and the Google suite of tools. If you're a Google shop, use the Microsoft shop, do those things with the tools that you have that aren't costing you additional money to find out what you actually need. Because I feel like oftentimes people buy software because they think they need it and it's going to be the solve, only to find out that it falls short of meeting their expectations, meeting their needs, or it becomes shelfware and it's a big waste of money.
And I
So
think one of the key things that you said is strategy. Like doing those things manually or doing those things with what you have allow you to then build the strategy that you need to successfully implement technology in a way that's meaningful.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that said, I think that is a good high note for us to leave on. I always like to ask people's piece of advice, things to not do, because I know things to do is going to vary because we all have to do different things because we've all got different customers and products and markets that we're trying to navigate different challenges. But the things to avoid at all costs, I think, are usually universally applicable. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of this webinar series. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge on everything digital. For those of you who are able to join us live today, thank you so much. We really appreciate you carving out some of your time to be a part of this. We will be sending out the recording, as I mentioned earlier. Give me 72 hours, please. We'll try to get it out to you by the end of the week, so that way you can soak up and share all of this goodness. And for anybody who is listening to this on demand, if you've got any questions or you want to talk more about digital, reach out to my friend Alex over here on LinkedIn. Thank you guys all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you back soon.
Thanks, everybody.